Hello, just here for part 2 of our Read Aloud series. I'll be reading again from The Adventures of Frog and Toad. Here we have our two main characters, Frog and Toad. This short story is called A Lost Button. Toad and Frog went for a long walk. They walked across a large meadow. They walked in the woods. They walked along the river. At last they went back home, to Toad's house. "Oh, drat," said Toad. "Not only do my feet hurt, but I have lost one of my buttons on my jacket." "Don't worry," said Frog. "We will go back to all the places where we walked. We will soon find your button." They walked back to the large meadow. They began to look for the button in the tall grass. "Here's your button!" cried Frog. "That is not my button," said Toad. "That button is black. My button is white." Toad put back the black button in his pocket. Have you ever lost something and had to retrace your steps? I know I have. The sparrow flew down. "Excuse me," said the sparrow. "Did you lose a button? I found one." "That's not my button," said Toad. "That button has 2 holes." "My button has 4 holes." Toad put the button with 2 holes in his pocket. They went back into the woods and looked into the dark paths. "Here's your button," said Frog. "That is not my button," cried Toad. "That button is small. My button is big." Toad put the small button in his pocket. Toad sure is collecting a lot of buttons. A raccoon came out from behind the tree. "I heard that you were looking for a button," he said. "Here's one I just found." "That is not my button," wailed Toad. "That button is square. My button is round." Toad put the square button in his pocket. Frog and Toad went back into the river. They looked for the button in the mud. "Here's your button," said Frog. "That is not my button," shouted Toad. "That button is thin. My button was thick." Toad put the thin button in his pocket. He was very angry. He jumped up and down and screamed, "The whole world is covered with buttons, and not one of them is mine." Toad ran and slammed the door. There on the floor he saw his white, 4-holed, big, round, thick button. "Oh," said Toad. "It was here all the time." What a lot of trouble I have made for Frog. Toad looked at all of the buttons out of his pocket. He took his sewing box from the shelf. Toad sewed the buttons all over his jacket. The next day, Toad gave his jacket to Frog. Frog thought it was beautiful. He had put it on and jumped for joy. None of the buttons fell off. Toad had sewed them on very well. What a nice thing he did for his friend. The end. And that was our second story from our storybook of The Adventures of Frog and Toad. I hope you enjoyed. Comment if you liked it. Bye.